Somewhere, in an Italian-American kitchen right now, a name gets called across a Sunday table, loud enough to cut through the sound of the sauce on the stove. Nobody at that table has ever stopped to ask what the name itself is carrying. Walk down an avenue Italians built with their own hands. Arthur Avenue in the Bronx, the Hill in St. Louis, the North End in Boston, and a bakery awning still carries a surname nobody in that family has ever fully explained to their own kids. There are 10 Italian surnames that carry an answer nobody in your family ever went looking for. Not a region, not a village, a population, a specific, documented, genetically distinct population, hiding inside the name still called across that same kitchen table. Not a headline from a mail-in ancestry kit. A population that shows up in peer-reviewed genomes, whether or not anyone in your family ever spat in a tube. The common belief is simple. An Italian surname tells you where your family came from. Sicily, Calabria, the north, the boot of the country, take your pick. The genome disagrees. Because some of these names were never fully Italian to begin with. Some of them are Norse. Some of them are Greek. Some of them are older than the word Italy itself, and they belong to a people modern science still argues about. To get there, we have to walk into a painted tomb outside a Tuscan hill town. We have to follow a barbarian army down from a river in Hungary. And we have to stand in a mountain village in Calabria where the language spoken at the dinner table is not Italian at all. 10 surnames. Gastaldi, Landolfi, Greco, Condò, Calogero, Schirò, Guzzetta, Lanza, Altavilla, Cecina. 10 secrets. For now, remember only this. Not all 10 will have an answer. One of them doesn't. Because everything we uncover after this, every name, every migration, every buried population, leads back to the one the scientists themselves cannot agree on. But first, the other 9. Start in the north, in the flat country below the Alps, in the 6th century of the Common Era. A confederation of warrior families rode down out of what is now Hungary and took the whole top of the peninsula for themselves. The Romans called them barbarians. They called themselves the Longobards, the Longbeards, and for 200 years they ran the north of Italy as their own kingdom. In 2018, a team led by Krishna Virama at Stony Brook University opened 2 Longobard cemeteries, one in Hungary, one in northern Italy, and sequenced the bones inside. The results, published in Nature Communications, showed entire family trees, still connected and still traceable. A full generation apart, 500 miles apart. This was not myth. This was a documented, genetically continuous migration, grave by grave. Some graves held almost nothing. Others held gold, weapons, imported glass. And the richer graves belonged, again and again, to the individuals whose ancestry traced furthest north. Status and origin buried together in the same soil. The Longobards did not just rule the north. They administered it, village by village, through an officer called a Gastaldus, the king's local steward. That title is still a surname, Gastaldi. If that name sits on your family tree, you are not carrying a job description. You are carrying the only Germanic kingdom that ever governed Italy from the inside. And its administrator is still doing paperwork 600 years of surnames later in Brooklyn phone books and Ohio parish registries. Most people scroll past a story like this one without ever wondering what their own name was doing 6 centuries ago. You are still here. That puts you with the ones who actually want to know what they are carrying, not just what they were told at Sunday dinner. This is the work this channel exists to do. Subscribe. There is another one coming. Not every Longobard name kept its job title. Some kept a first name instead. Landolfi comes directly from a Longobard given name. Land and wolf fused into one word. The kind of name a warrior family gave its sons for 6 generations, long before that family had ever heard Italian spoken as we know it today. No test kit reads either name. What reads them is history, a job title, a war name, both riding the same invasion. One surname carries a job. The other carries a war party. Different families. Same invasion. Two names. One kingdom. It lasted just long enough to hand down its bureaucracy and its bloodlines to people who never once thought of Hungary as home. Now go south. All the way south, past Naples, into the mountains of Calabria and the heel of Puglia. There are villages there, a few dozen of them tucked into the Aspromonte Massif, where the family at the dinner table is not speaking Italian. They are speaking Greek, a form of it nobody outside those villages has spoken in centuries. Walk through a town like Bova or Galiciano and the street signs are bilingual. Italian on top, Greek underneath. A language UNESCO's atlas now lists as endangered, still spoken by grandmothers who never once thought of themselves as anything but Calabrian. In 2021, a team of population geneticists, Sarno, Petrilli, Abbondio and colleagues, published a genome study of these communities in scientific reports. What they found was not a folk memory. It was long-term genetic isolation. A population that had drifted apart from its neighbors for so long, its DNA still carries a direct signature reaching back toward the Eastern Mediterranean and the Caucasus. This is not a swab kit result. It is a documented population, a name, a village. The community your surname was born inside, not a promise of what is still in your blood today. That distinction matters because one surname in these villages says the quiet part out loud. Greco, the Greek. Somewhere between the age of Magna Graecia and the fall of Byzantium, a family in Calabria or Salento stood out from its neighbors. Different enough that everyone else simply called them what they were. The name stuck. It is one of the most common surnames in the south of Italy today. This is not a lab result either. No genome has tested the Greco family tree specifically. It is a documented label attached to a documented, isolated population. If your family carries it, that is what you are carrying. The last visible name of a population that Byzantium forgot to fully erase. Two more names from the same mountains, quieter but no less specific. Condò, a surname clustered almost entirely in the Greek-speaking towns of the Ionian coast. Calogero, from the Greek word for monk, Kalogeros, carried by families whose three names, one isolated, drifted, half-forgotten population, still sitting in the mountains, still sitting in your family tree, whether you ever learned a word of Greek or not. Stop and think for a moment about what that isolation actually means. A handful of villages, surrounded on every side by Italian-speaking Calabria for over 1,000 years, and the DNA still has not fully blended in. That is not folklore holding out. That is measurable population structure, still visible in a lab today. Each of these three names had already found its answer. In a lab, in a paper, in a peer-reviewed number. Not every name on this list would be so lucky. To understand exactly how a name can survive that long without dissolving, you have to look at what happened 3 centuries later, on the same coastline, to a different people entirely. Between 1468 and the 1700s, waves of Albanian refugees crossed the Adriatic to escape the Ottoman advance. They resettled in the mountains of Calabria and Sicily. They call themselves the Arboresh, and in villages like Piana degli Albanesi, they still do. Walk into one of those villages on a Sunday, and the Mass is still said in the Byzantine Rite, in a language closer to Tirana than to Rome 500 years after the crossing. In 2015, a study in the European Journal of Human Genetics compared the Y chromosomes of Calabrian and Sicilian Arboresh communities directly against modern Albanian populations across the Adriatic. The result was not a resemblance. It was an undeniable match. A genetic line running straight back to the Balkans, preserved for 500 years inside communities that never stopped marrying within themselves. 5 centuries of choosing partners from inside the same handful of villages will do that. It is not mysticism. It is arithmetic, an isolated gene pool that never had the numbers to dilute. Two surnames carry that line into Italian-American kitchens today. Schirò, Guzzetta, both Arborish, both traced to the same refugee villages, both carried today by families who never once doubted they were Italian. No lab has tested either family individually. What the 2015 study tested was the village, the community, the population these two names come from. For that population, the genome says something precise. It says Balkan, preserved, and never fully diluted. If one of those two names is yours, your family did not simply come from Italy. Your family survived an empire's collapse by crossing a sea and refusing for 5 centuries to stop being who they already were. Now, cross to the island at the very bottom of the map, Sicily, and go back further to the 11th century. A small army of Norman knights, the same stock that had just conquered England, landed on the northern coast near Palermo. They did not stop until the whole island belonged to them. In 2017, researchers led by Stefania Sarno at the University of Bologna sequenced the genetic layers of Sicily and southern Italy, published in scientific reports. Buried inside the data was a Nordic signature, haplogroup Ione, the same marker carried by Scandinavian and Norman lineages, concentrated almost entirely around Palermo, Trapani, and a small hill town called Cacamo. In parts of that region, close to 1 in 5 male lineages still carries it. Drive into Cacamo today, and the castle above the town is still Norman stone. Still standing guard over the same hillside, their ships first climbed 9 centuries ago. The Norman kings did not just conquer Sicily. They renamed it, refortified it, and left their own family names planted in the soil like flags. Palermo's own cathedral still wears the whole conquest in stone. Norman walls, Byzantine gold mosaic, and Arabic honeycomb ceiling. 3 empires, layered without apology. One surname there is not a metaphor. It is a title. Lanza, spear, the name of Norman feudal lords who held land across western Sicily for generations after the conquest. A second name carries something bigger than a weapon. It carries the dynasty itself. Altavilla, the Italian form of Hauteville, the Norman family name of Roger I, the knight who took Sicily and founded a kingdom his descendants ruled for over a century. Neither surname was tested in that lab in Bologna. The haplogroup map was drawn from anonymous samples, region by region. What these two names carry is documented feudal history, sitting inside the same region the map lit up. If your family carries either of these two names, you are not carrying a coincidence of geography. You are carrying the last Norman kingdom Europe ever built south of the English Channel, and it is still walking around, 900 years later, in Sicilian American families who have never once connected their own last name to Winchester or Rouen. 4 peoples, hiding inside one word. Italian. The 10th name is about to break that pattern completely. It does not come with a settled answer. It comes with an argument that has run for over 2,500 years and still is not finished. Go north now, into Tuscany, to a hill town called Volterra. The tombs there are painted in colors that have not faded, and the language on the walls belongs to no family of languages anyone has ever fully translated. The people who built those tombs called themselves the Ravenna. Everyone else called them the Etruscans. Banquet scenes, dancers, wine cups mid-pour, frozen in fresco for 26 centuries, in a red and ochre modern pigment still struggles to match. Herodotus said they came from Anatolia, refugees from a famine, sailing west to found a new home in Italy. For 2,000 years, that was treated as a nice story and nothing more. Then the genetics arrived, and the genetics could not agree with itself. In 2014, a genome-wide study, led by Silvia Girotto, published in PLOS One, found something specific. In isolated pockets of Tuscany, particularly around Volterra and the Casentino Valley, modern populations still show a measurable genetic continuity with the ancient Etruscans buried in those same hills. Then a second team went looking. Francesca Tassi and her colleagues, writing in the American Journal of Physical Anthropology in 2013, tested the Anatolian half of Herodotus's story directly against the DNA. It found that the resemblance between Tuscany and the Near East is real, but far too old to have arrived with the Etruscans. It reaches back to the Neolithic instead, thousands of years before Etruria existed at all. 2 peer-reviewed teams, 2 genomes, 2 answers that do not fully agree. Nobody has fully translated the Etruscan language either. Most of what survives is names. On tombs, on mirrors, on wine jars. A civilization that gave Tuscany its name and still refuses to fully explain where it came from. One surname carries that unresolved history directly. Cecina, the Italian form of an actual Etruscan family name, Cecina, painted onto the walls of the tombs at Volterra. And still, today, both a surname and the name of a river valley in the exact region where the genetic continuity was measured. And here is the part no other name on this list can claim. If Cecina is yours, the science has not settled what you are carrying. Not because nobody has looked. Because the 2 best-funded, peer-reviewed studies on the subject looked at the same valley and came back with different centuries. Of a language once spoken across a third of the Italian peninsula, only a few hundred words survive intact today. Mostly names, like this one. Somewhere right now, an Italian-American who has never once thought about wine jars or painted tombs signs a lease, addresses an envelope. The name on it outlived the empire that first carved it into stone. 10 surnames, 10 secrets. A Longobard steward's job title, a warlord's war name, a Greek word for a monk hiding inside a Calabrian dinner table, an empire's collapse, crossing a sea and refusing to dissolve, a Norman spear planted 900 years ago and never fully removed. And one, the last one, that even the 2 research teams who went looking for the answer could not fully agree on. Somewhere in an Italian-American kitchen right now, a name gets called across a Sunday table, loud enough to cut through the sound of the sauce on the stove. Nobody at that table has heard, until now, what the name itself was actually carrying. For 9 of these names, the answer was sitting in a lab, waiting to be published. For the 10th, the answer is still being argued about by the people whose entire job is to know. If you want to keep following the DNA evidence, the history books left out. 1 surname, 1 population, 1 buried argument at a time. Subscribe. Every week, there is another piece of the record that turns out to be more complicated and more interesting than the version we were taught. Turn the bell on if you don't want to wait to find out what the next name is going to say.